I think the real question we all have to answer when engaged in research is, what kind of person are you going to become? And I'm here absolutely refusing to fall into the trap of saying, well, how much money are you going to make? Because that's not the question, that's not the constraint, that's not the limit. We're surrounded by people with money. I mean, sorry, we just vacationed in the south of France. What's the financial worth of any 10 people we walk past or 10 yachts we walk past? We were just in Las Vegas, and you walk past people who are not just wealthy but wasting a lot of money. Money is everywhere, and yet the potential to make a positive difference in the world is scarce. Why? Because self-cultivation is scarce. Self-discipline is scarce. Clarity of mind is scarce, right? What's common is the mind frame to sit at a poker table, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, and ignoring a beautiful woman in a bikini who's dancing about 3 meters away from you while you play with these cards. It's sickening, but this is the human condition. This is the kind of ignorance and the unexamined life we're all born into. And some people play poker, and some people play video games, and for some people it's other vices, right? But the ultimate constraint on your ability to make the world a better place is you. It's easy to be cynical about these things. It's easy to be contemptuous and dismissive when you get this kind of question. From many, many different people, I received the question, why read books? How can anyone possibly justify spending their time reading nonfiction, doing original research, trying to learn new things, instead of just playing video games, just living a life for short-term, self-indulgent pleasures? And there's no doubt some of those questions were insincere, but I tried to muster up the optimism to answer as many of them as I could, treating them as sincere, treating them not just as insults from people who are making excuses for their lifestyle choices. In many cases, lifestyle choices that they know to be bad. So the way this one is phrased is also interesting. Quote, I am curious if you have a positive example in mind. Okay, that comma was misplaced. I'm curious if you have a positive example in mind. It seems to be human nature that people just want to enjoy life and avoid doing things they don't like. Why would they be interested in the history, politics, or culture of Africa? Of course, it could be Africa, it could be Asia, it could be any example here. Why is it better to read a newspaper than having fun with friends? So you can see I was pretty curt, I was pretty brief in my reply to this. But it's interesting that this is also framed in, do you have an example in mind? Do you have a positive role model in mind? And I say, yeah, and let's really talk about and think about people like Socrates in contrast to characters like Batman in fiction, or what children are perceiving or receiving. But yeah, it's deeply saddening to imagine people growing up with this basic concept of reading books, doing original research, and learning about the real world, not just learning about fiction, not just reading for entertainment, but reading to make yourself a better person and to make the world a better place, that's so fundamentally alien that you'd get this as a sincere question. And you can see from this reply, it actually was a sincere question. This person went on to watch my other video, An Education in Politics, What Do I Read, and are checking out some of the other stuff on my channel. This is someone who was really sincerely questioning, why read books? So there you go, guys. When you get that kind of question on YouTube, it's not always trolling. Sometimes it's people really stopping and reflecting on their own lives, and maybe on the lives of the role models they've grown up with. One of the most corrupting influences that universities have on our society is that people misapprehend them as if they represent learning, as if they represent education. The modern Western university is a research institution. They represent an opportunity to do original research. The modern Western university is a credential issuing institution. They represent the opportunity to get a credential. Tragically, if you really want to know about education and learning, almost all of that goes on outside of the university. That's what universities are today. I can become fluent in Chinese, and then I can go to a university, and they can give me a credential for writing up my original research on Chinese literature, Chinese poetry, you name it, right? That's when universities work well. That's what they can do. But if you look at the mechanics, if you look at what's actually involved in learning the Chinese language, and this is sometimes comically true, the university will not do very much for me aside from giving me a library card and a desk and the opportunity to teach myself. Believe me, I know some examples where people paid a lot of money to study a language at university, and they didn't even get that. They got incredibly little support. Of course, I used to be married to an anthropologist. Anthropology is a very, very strange field that way. The relationship between universities as educational institutions and research institutions. So I'm going to answer two questions in this video, one of which was sent in by a particular viewer, a supporter on Patreon, who's asking about the nature of research. And the other is a question that's coming from many, many, many different people in just the last couple of weeks, asking about the value of reading books.
Why?
I got this question again and again. Why read books? And it seems absurd, and it seems insincere, and it seems stupid, but many of the people asking the question are indeed being entirely sincere. And I get this letter from a guy named Lee, and Lee writes to me and asks, "Hey Eisel, I've been thinking quite a bit about your recent videos on regret. And there's a New York Times article on the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, and generally about spending excessive time and energy on efforts that may not have positive outcomes. I'm a 23-year-old physics PhD student studying antimatter and particle detector design, and I feel like I may be wasting my potential to make a positive difference in the world. While I enjoy what I do, scientists often get a free pass on thinking critically about what they spend their time and energy on, just because their work is so intellectually challenging. Studying pure physics will never have as direct of an impact as working on clean energy, science policy, or even finding a way to apply my STEM knowledge to vegan activism. However, I understand that physics has changed philosophy and society in some profound ways. My question for you is, to what extent are pure sciences a worthy endeavor, even if there are no obvious applications? The only people I know that will take this question seriously are convinced that physics is the most important work in the world, seemingly because it is difficult or elegant or something of the sort." And he says correctly, I'm sure you've experienced something similar with Buddhist scholars of Buddhism who really believe this sort of thing. And I'd like to hear an opinion outside of my own academic research in physics bubble. Okay? So, great question. The meaning of the word experiment. Absolutely, by definition, if something is experimental, if it's truly an experiment, then the outcomes are unknown. Right? And this becomes a kind of problem and corrupting influence in academia, because research is often designed in such a way that some kind of important finding has to be at the end, or people have to be able to dissimulate some kind of important finding. What if you do 4 years of anthropological research and it's not even a null hypothesis? You really have no particular findings. What if, you engage in years? And I recently looked at the laws concerning internships in the sciences, in areas exactly like physics and chemistry, where people can do academic internships for years and years and years, being paid very, very little money to be part of, experiments that go on for a very long time. And what is the outcome? The outcome may really be unknown. And it may be trivial, right? The findings may not be what anyone was hoping to discover. However, I think the real question we all have to answer when engaged in research is, what kind of person are you going to become? And I'm here absolutely refusing to fall into the trap of saying, well, how much money are you going to make? Because that's not the question, that's not the constraint, that's not the limit. We're surrounded by people with money. I mean, sorry, we just vacationed in the south of France. What's the financial worth of any 10 people we walk past or 10 yachts we walk past? So it depends on where you live. Even in Detroit, I'm surrounded by very wealthy people all the time. We were just in Las Vegas, and you walk past people who are not just wealthy, but wasting a lot of money. Money is everywhere, and yet the potential to make a positive difference in the world is scarce. Why? Because self-cultivation is scarce. Self-discipline is scarce. Clarity of mind is scarce, right? What's common is the mind frame to sit at a poker table, smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, and ignoring a beautiful woman in a bikini who's dancing about 3 meters away from you while you play with these cards. It's sickening, but this is the human condition. This is the kind of ignorance and the unexamined life we're all born into. And some people play poker, and some people play video games, and for some people it's other vices, right? But the ultimate constraint on your ability to make the world a better place is you. The vast majority of people on Earth, the vast majority of people who could see this video, what they need is the motivation to engage in learning, research, and self-improvement in the absence of an institution to help them, in the absence of a university, in the absence of any clear credential or financial reward at the end of that process of learning. Doing a PhD in physics. I think what you've hinted at here is that you've correctly apprehended that in some ways this is changing you. This is changing you psychologically and philosophically. It changes your outlook on the world. You look at the scientists around you. Again, it's in there briefly, but you're alluding to the fact these are people who've adopted a kind of ideology, a kind of scientism, a sense of self-importance, a sense of mission. And they're in some ways blinded to the importance of politics, the real world, maybe, the world outside of the chalkboard and the laboratory. They've shut themselves off from certain aspects of reality as history unfolds around them. And they've convinced themselves to narrowly focus on areas of research that could make a big difference in the world, but as you've alluded to, in all probability may not. You can spend millions of dollars and years of your life on research, and the outcomes may be merely academic. The outcomes may be less decisive even than a null hypothesis. They may kind of discover nothing one way or the other. That's part of the definition of an experiment, right? But what kind of person are you going to become? And it has been a somewhat crushing revelation for me to realize when looking at many PhD programs that if I get on this path, if I do this, I am not going to like the person I will become. This is going to make me a worse person. I'm not saying that of all PhD programs, but when looking at a specific program, looking at the process, what I'm going to learn, what I'm going to do, even the social process, I have really had to question with different kinds of PhD programs, not how much money am I going to make? What kind of person am I going to be at the end of this? And I'm being straight with you. I did not like the answer, even compared to the option of joining the military. I know if I join the Army, it's going to change me. I know. And I signed up to join the Army. I mean, that was a really life-altering conclusion to come to. This relates to the broader and simpler question of why read books at all. Over time, these activities change who you are and what you have to offer the world. If your hobby every weekend is to spend the whole weekend knitting socks, after 5 years, think of the enormous collection of socks you will have built up and the skill you will have developed in knitting. And you can give socks as gifts to all your coworkers. It's easy to imagine what your life would be like. You have a closet full of socks after 5 years and a very narrow skill set as a result. And it's going to change you. Change who you are. You're the guy who knits socks all weekend, every weekend. That may seem like a ridiculous example. If we're really being honest, how does knitting socks compare to playing video games? What is going to accumulate over time? This is very simply the justification for reading books, and we're here talking about, of course, nonfiction. If you took the same amount of time over 5 years reading books, learning new things, not in preparation for a PhD, not in preparation for a career, but to make yourself a better person and to make the world a better place, think really about what accumulates. I talked to someone today who is a longtime viewer of the channel, and they explained to me what an important guiding influence this channel has been in their lives. Because they were someone who couldn't get ahead in school for many years, who couldn't get formal credentials, formal education, someone for whom getting a PhD seemed totally unattainable. And one message they took from this channel was, hey, take yourself seriously as an intellectual. Get motivated, take responsibility for your own intellectual development. Stop looking for the outside world to provide you with a teacher. Ultimately, it's on you. Whether you're going to live an unexamined life or a meaningful life, whether you're going to learn, whether you can teach yourself. And this particular person, obviously, a lot of the emphasis in her learning has been on language learning. I think she understood correctly, whether or not she got this idea from my channel, maybe it was her own interest to begin with, that language learning is something where the university or formal institutions don't give you a whole lot of help, and where you can make a lot of progress on your own time, without a laboratory, without any particular equipment that would be provided to you by a large institution. A few days before that, I had a series of emails back and forth with a viewer of the channel. Actually, a recent viewer, recent supporter on Patreon. I don't think he's been watching for that long. But he saw my videos dealing with indigenous peoples, indigenous languages, history of colonialism, genocide. And he got really motivated to start learning the language that's indigenous in his area of the United States of America. We had a really interesting correspondence back and forth about how best he's going to proceed with that. So he's decided to commit the time and energy, again, outside of academia. He doesn't have a professor. He doesn't have a tenure track job ahead of him. He doesn't have a PhD coming to him. Why? To make himself a better person, to make the world a better place. The people who are going to hear the message this channel has to deliver to you are the people who have ears to hear, the people who are ready for that message to take it on board. And I think some people probably see what I'm talking about on this channel, and maybe it burns away in the back of their minds, and maybe 10 years later they think, you know what? There's another way to live. The unexamined life is not worth living. And I'm going to start living a more gathered, focused, meaningful life with a real sense of purpose and a real sense of self-discipline. I think one of the tragedies we're all burdened with in life is that the options we're denied tend to just be the options we're not aware of, the options we didn't even consider, where it's like, oh, you stop and realize your whole life would have been different if you'd studied Latin back when you were in high school, or if you had studied Greek and it wasn't offered at your school, but there was another high school just a few blocks away in the same city where they were teaching Latin or they were teaching ancient Greek, and you stop and realize, what if I had even been presented with that option? What if someone had just said to me, hey, you can do a transfer course, you could go over to that other high school and study Latin, and that's going to open up other opportunities for you, and you didn't even consider it. When I was growing up, I never had a role model. I never had anyone to imitate. I never had anyone to follow. Not even on the simplest questions we've dealt with here. I never had the idea that you could be 100% sober. I never had the idea you could be 100% vegan. I never had the idea that you could just not compromise with cultural expectations that are imposed on you. I never had the idea, and a lot of you guys I know laugh at this, me being honest about my sex life and talking about my sex life. I never had the idea that you could be a real intellectual and be honest and open about sex. I totally grew up with the idea that being an intellectual meant living in celibacy. And of course, I found that affirmed in Asian philosophy, not just European. Guys, I am not out here telling you that I have all the answers. but I'm really pleased to see the productive outcomes of my at least raising these questions.